Okay, let's see if we can make something happen that is just a little preview. Okay, I just wanted to do a little teaser there. I like to sometimes just sort of test what actually can I do live, just without too much involvement of any technology, just enough to get the message across. And so that's a little teaser of what I'm going to experiment with at the end of this. I even just decided at the last minute to go live. Even though right now, at the very same time, live, oops, sorry about that, if you are watching live, the Immersion Conference at Gaia is beginning. And so I'm about to leave here and go have that content streaming so that I can kind of pop in periodically on my Facebook page to just share some tidbits about what's going on and what I find interesting and stimulating, so that we can be in dialogue, or as I like to say, in Gaia-Logue with the Gaia programming. Because it is about dialogue. It is so about dialogue. Well, and I would say something even beyond dialogue, because I feel like dialogue always implies a kind of two-party communication system, or a two-way back and forth. It doesn't really open space for a broader conversation where more voices and more perspectives are heard and can share space safely and effectively in ways that allow for the coexistence of different ideas and different identities and different ways of being and knowing to be able to be present at the same time. And so I feel like it's beyond dialogue. And, Gaia as a metaphor for Earth, maybe it is really about being in conversation with the Earth. I think that's what a lot of these, both the ancient traditions and also the new science is telling us, that actually our cures are in the very Earth that we've been trying to, dominate for so many centuries. So that's all very interesting, and to me, I find it very interesting that this immersion conference is about where those intersections of science and spirituality connect. Because from what I keep seeing, and I'm not a quantum physicist or a quantum theorist, and I have, probably just an educated layperson's experience like you might have, and I'm just listening to a lot of these different perspectives, and it is kind of fascinating how science is beginning to explain things that have been previously considered to be too mysterious, right? And when they're too mysterious, we call them magic, things like that. I thought I had this all set up with a good way to have my book here in front of me, and I didn't yet. Well, not while it's open, anyway. So this episode of the Temple of Grief, which I am calling Beware the Ides of March. Right here it is, March 15th, and that's why I was like, let me just do it live. Noon Eastern Time, March 15th, 2025. Beware the Ides of March. And when I was a child, my mother used to say that. And now, in hindsight, she probably said it sometime in early March and sometime around, or before St. Patrick's Day, where it was something that was said. And it took me a long time as a child to understand why she was saying that. And then, of course, Caesar had this warning, this, sort of oracle that said, beware the tides of March, and of course, or the Ides of March. And we don't really, like, our way of being in modern life we don't really even follow those cycles anymore, like the Ides being the mid-month, right? Like how often do we pause and reflect nowadays when we are essentially halfway through a lunar cycle? Because there's the solar cycle and there's the lunar cycle, right? And so there's 12 months, but there's 13 moons. And so how often is there overlap? And I don't even know, is the Ides on the solar or the lunar calendar? If you know, please comment in the comments and cite your source. We like it when people cite their sources. We want to know how we are making ourselves literate and who we are using for sources. So please, if you do know, comment and let me know. So beware the Ides of March. And so, again, we're looking at Julius Caesar, right, as this figure in history, and what does he represent? He kind of, in some ways, represents this sort of totalitarian figure. But in other ways, if we look at our broader European culture history, ancient Rome and ancient Greece are considered these kinds of pillars of civilization, if you will. And that's not even beginning to ask the question of how those civilizations may have been complicit in various acts of colonization and genocide, right? Like we're not even starting that conversation yet. But it's good to acknowledge that conversation is underneath maybe what we're talking about on top. And so we can ignore it. We can ignore it. We can ignore it. Doesn't mean it's going to go away. So, et tu, Brutus, right? Even you. And so I ask myself and I ask you, who is your Brutus? Who or what scenario was the time when you had that deep sense of betrayal? And if you've never had it, it's coming. We've all had to experience it probably once in our lives at least. That moment when you said, man, I really thought you were not going to be that guy or whatever. You were not going to be one of those people, or you were not going to betray me in that way, or you were not going to, like where you really just lost faith and hope in either a particular person or a particular institution, right? Like I feel like those of us who have ever lost our religion, losing one's religion, I feel it's a moment that kind of we all could benefit from going through. If everybody could lose their religion one time in life so that you have to reclaim it on purpose and consciously, if you haven't already had your crisis of faith, you better get on it now, because that's kind of a requirement for your soul's evolution, is to go through the questioning, why do I even believe this to be true? And then maybe allow yourself to entertain the thought, wait, do I actually really, truly believe this to be true? And if I'm not sure, what other versions of the truth are out there that resonate with me in a more beautiful way, in a more delicious way, in a way that feels in harmony with my natural environment, in a way that feels loving and compassionate, right? This is a great time to get on board with that, right? We just had a full moon and an eclipse within the last 48 hours. Also, Mercury's in retrograde for the next 2 weeks, so if you pay attention to that, just be mindful of your communication habits and maybe be a little more patient with others as they are communicating with you, because when Mercury's in retrograde, there tends to be mishaps in communication. And it's great advice generally, but right now, in particular, let's just be a little extra conscious of the ways we communicate and how we send and receive messages, and when there are disruptions to those messages, like a previous argument or somebody's political bias, right? So the phrase that came to me as I was in meditation preparing to do this live stream, I like to do that beforehand. I feel like it really centers the conversation. So I'm going to drink a sip of water because I want to have my thirst slaked before I say these next words. Yes, that's right. I just used slaked in a sentence. In order for me to make it rhyme with something, I'm going to have to go outside, having raked the leaves that were under the snow that fell in November, which finally dried out and are still on the lawn and still have to be raked in March. So, welcome to Erie, Pennsylvania, where, by the way, if you're in the Midwest and you've been on tornado watch for the last, day or so, I hope that the worst has passed for you. I hope that Yansan, the sacred Afro-Brazilian entity, who is the sort of sacred being of the winds of change and those kinds of tempests of transformation, that if she can hold you on her lap while the winds of transformation are blowing, may you be safe from harm. We're just at like the top end. We're at basically the nostril of the storm. So we're getting some wind and some rain and some thunder, but we're not in too much danger right now. But as I was in meditation this morning, these two questions came up. What values are worth the cost of a friendship? And then the follow-up question, whose friendships are worth the cost of your values? So I'm going to say them both again. The first one is, what values are worth the cost of a friendship? And the second one, whose friendships are worth the cost of your values? Because I want you to consider both sides of that equation. Again, we're working in binaries for the moment. But then I want you to follow that up with, and then what happens if and when you've cut out everyone else except for the people that have the same exact values as you? What happens when you cut everyone else out except the people who share the same exact values as you? What happens? Well, you can look up, I think it's like bubble theory or something in communication theory, especially in social media. We get these bubbles where we think everyone in my little bubble represents the broader world, and so therefore I can believe this very narrow view with these, this small group of people who also believe this very narrow view, and we can just ignore the rest of the world. And in some ways, that can be ignorant bliss, right? But this metaphor, okay, I'm going to put that down because I have a bookmark in my journal. So this metaphor of the bubble, let's just talk about it for a second. Because you can kind of think of it as a safety bubble, right? Are you in your safety bubble? I'm in my safety bubble. I've got my protective bubble of energy around me. You can even imagine it like the sacred Viracocha from our shamanic practice. Let's just go ahead and do that right now. You can even imagine that sacred bubble of divine light is strengthening itself around you, but it's still very porous and open so that you can receive light and air and nourishment and water. So it's protective, but it is not rigid. Because if you think about a bubble, we think about a bubble as kind of having a rigid shell, right? And then when you pop it, everything explodes, right? Well, if you think about how big that bubble might be and how solid and rigid that bubble might be, if that bubble is barreling along through space, smashing into all these other smaller bubbles and crushing people in their bubbles, then we have to rethink, like, how big does your protective bubble need to be before you are harming other people? So if our protective bubbles can be a little more porous so that we can hear each other and share space with each other and see each other in honest ways. Now, right now, I think a lot of people are going into hiding because there's so much, toxic energy around there that is fear-based, that is making people lash out at some of the most vulnerable groups in our society. So, I especially feel for the transgender community who had probably just been starting to feel a little bit safe expressing their true, authentic, natural selves, and are, finding themselves feeling very unsafe. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. So I'm going to go back to these questions that I posed because it leads to some other observations I've made. Just because, I like to talk about some of the content. I usually try to be very explicit about the content I'm consuming. Or not explicit, but just conscious and aware. I try to say, am I ready for my brain to ingest this material into my consciousness, into my psyche? And if it's, if I don't feel like looking at something violent, I'll choose not to look at violence. Or if I want to, not focus on X or Y or Z, I'll say, or if I don't want to give, a certain media conglomerate my money, I'll specifically choose something from a different channel. So, okay, so which do I want to talk about first? Okay. All right, we're going to talk about, so the questions, and remember those questions? They were, what values are worth the cost of a friendship, and whose friendships are worth the cost of your values, and then what happens when you've cut out everyone else except people with the exact same values. So we're gonna just go ahead and talk about genocide and Holocaust. Because that's where it inevitably leads, right? I mean, I don't mean to belittle that or say it lightly. But there was a movie out that got nominated for several awards. I know it won at least one of the best supporting actor categories. It might have won something else, but it was I think it was What a Pain was the name of the movie. It was the Jesse Eisenberg one that I think he wrote and directed and produced and acted in it. So it was, you can kind of sense that it was really his sort of pet project, right? Like it was something that was very dear to him. And we'll just go ahead and say there was this theme or this thread of what we might call Holocaust tourism, because that is a thing. And sometimes just hearing that phrase can be jarring for someone. But people have different reasons for it, right? So like in this case, the main character and his brother wanted to do this sort of pilgrimage to the lands of their grandmother who survived the Holocaust, and so to sort of go back, and it was the first time he and his brother of that generation had gone back to Europe to see, where their grandparents lived before they were taken by the Nazis into a concentration camp and then escaped and survived and moved to the United States. So, so there is this kind of series of scenes or this thread of the conversation about what does it feel like to go be present in a physical place where an atrocity like a genocide or an attempted genocide has happened. And this goes back to the other program that I was telling you about, the dead files of a woman that speaks to the dead. And when the dead are there because there has been, enslavement or torture or genocide, those leave an energetic imprint. They do. People know it in different ways. They sense it in different ways. There are 2 times where I can recall very clearly sensing the difference. And one of those times was when I was in Europe on tour with the Sonoran Desert Chorale with my mother and my sister. They needed people to come in and they needed extra sopranos, basically, to go on tour to Europe. So my mother invited me, she paid for my ticket, and I went on tour in Europe, and one of the events that the choir did as a group was they went to a concentration camp. There's like a historical, what do you call it, not a museum, I guess it's a museum, a sort of Holocaust museum that is dedicated to preserving the history and remembering, this is what happened, let's not let it happen again. P.S. P.S. PPS, PPPS. Let's not let it happen again. Let's not let it happen again. So, when we went to, I think it was called Teresina or Teresina, something like that. And I believe this was in the Czech Republic. I can't remember if someone knows where we were. Again, please put it in the comments, cite a link so people can know what I'm talking about. And there was something about walking through the gates of a place like that and sensing just the heaviness still in the air, on the air. The heaviness in the air in a place like that. And it would have been, I don't know, early 2000s probably, so, 50 plus years after what had occurred, and there was still an energetic imprint. And this is before I entered shamanic training. This is before I really knew much of anything about how the flow of energy works, but I felt it. I felt the difference. And in some ways, it really evokes a reverence. Like once you sense that something that deeply disturbing and awful and wrong has occurred in the place where you're standing, I think it sort of demands of you a certain awareness of what that, the magnitude of that, and the weight of that for humanity, right? It's good for us to remember that once in a while. The next time we try to claim that an entire religious group or an entire ethnic group of people is somehow the target of whatever hatred or fear, that's never the point. That's never the point. So I may have gotten myself off track there. So I'm looking at my outline. Aren't outlines a wonderful thing? They keep you from getting lost in the wilderness, I'm telling you. So, okay, so there's this, What a Pain movie that's about this sort of Holocaust tourism. And I want us to keep in mind the thread of this theme is, who is your Brutus? Et tu? Who is the one that was your even you? That was your betrayal? And maybe it was recent, and maybe it was, decades ago. But the moment when you had that sense of betrayal of someone or something, because sometimes it's closer than we think. So, in our training with the Four Winds Society, Alberto Villoldo tells a story about a young man who, I don't remember if he was a patient or a student of his, but he was coming to the training and coming to Alberto with a question that was, I don't remember what prompted the question, but somehow it was something about his relationship to his grandmother and his grandmother's well-being. So it was about both of their wellness individually, but also their relationship together. And I don't remember the specifics of how he came to realize that there was something going on in this relationship between him and his grandmother. Perhaps he felt like it was a karmic bond that needed to be resolved. I don't know. I don't remember the details. But in the story, the young man learns somehow that he is the reincarnation of the Nazi soldier that ordered someone that she knew to death. And I may have gotten those details wrong, but somehow she, the grandmother, knew and saw and probably feared and hated this Nazi soldier who basically killed someone she loved. And then to have the soul or the spirit of that Nazi soldier be reborn as her own grandson. So there was a karmic debt. There was something that had to be healed, something that had to be addressed and healed and resolved between those two souls. And so what they ended up having to do is this very, very, they had to really kind of go in it with a deeply compassionate ceremonial kind of funeral service for, I don't remember how, I think they did it for the soul of the person who had passed, and also for the grandmother who was needing to resolve her own trauma in order to die peacefully and consciously and not be carrying around all that weight with us at the moment of passing. This is why we do the healing. This is why we do the deep inner healing, because we don't want to leave our baggage for future generations. We need to clean up our shit. We need to clean up our baggage. We need to dispose of or recycle and renew our shit and our dirty laundry, frankly. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. So when we look at who's your Brutus, even you, what if that even you is someone in your family? What if that deep betrayal comes from someone in your family? I'm not going to share any specifics about mine, but I'm just going to say probably most of us have to go through that more than once before we learn whatever is the lesson that needs to be learned about that. And we'll probably have to experience it on multiple perspectives. Especially if one is in a family of 6 children, right? That's all sorts of karmic debts that we intended to come in and handle in this lifetime, so we don't have to keep carrying them with us in future lifetimes. So, do I want to talk about that first? Yeah, we're going to go over. So this whole idea of seeing your betrayal in your own family. The other thing that I just got turned on to, we watched it, we binged all 3 episodes, and I like to sort of keep myself in my own little bubble, speaking about this bubble. I try not to follow all the noise, all the frenzy, all the stupidness, Now, news is not stupid. There are important things of the day that need to be considered and allowed into our awareness, but there's also, the cranking up of the frenzy that is unnecessary and unhealthy, in my opinion. So this was the story of Ruby Franke. Now, apparently this was news like 2 years ago, and my partner was aware of it. I was happily ignorant of it. So, nutshell story, here's some young Mormon housewife YouTube influencer, right? So there was this sort of, the way they frame it in the documentary, and again, if my family, I know you like to be called LDS, they did use both terms in the film, but so they did have just a slight critique about the culture of that particular town and how sort of fixated it was on this idea of perfection, the happy, perfect family. And so she was presenting this idea of this happy, perfect mother as the face of her YouTube channel. And long story, long story, very short. Also, spoiler alert, if you were also as unfamiliar as I was with what happened. So if you need to, pause this, go watch that and come back if you haven't known anything about it. This woman got so fixated on identifying evil everywhere. She kept pointing at evil everywhere. She kept seeing it everywhere. That she started seeing it in her own family members. So when she saw it in her husband, she banished him from the house. There's also a bit of a weird culty trend, like apparently she had some weird culty guru leader that led her down some fixated ideas. And this is why I'm like kind of a bit bizarrely, grotesquely amused and intrigued by all of these documentaries about cults, because it seems like there's so many. There's so many people giving away their power to these other people, when the real truth is that we have the power in ourselves, but it really takes conscious development. So it takes this kind of, genuine self-disciplined act of self-reflection, right? Like when we take the time to reflect on our stasis with the world, with ourselves, with our families, with our environment, with our community, etc. I think any spiritual tradition asks you to do that. So if you're not already doing that, I invite you to do that now. So here's this woman who started seeing evil everywhere. And I'm using that word because even within the documentary, the language that some of the family members were using to describe the situation, where they were talking about the literal devil, that somehow, like they were saying something to the effect of, the devil knocked on the door and she invited him in. And I also grew up Mormon, and those kinds of encountering the devil stories, you hear them more so in like the founding with Joseph Smith and his like trying to you don't often hear them in like people's personal testimonies, right? Like if you're there, you know what I'm talking about. The first Sunday of every month, people get up and it's open mic for why they love being Mormon. I'm totally condensing that in a nutshell. And very, very rarely do you hear someone tell of like a literal battle with the devil. So it was interesting for me as a recovering Mormon, I'll just say that, who was watching, these fellow recovering Mormons, because maybe they are still in the church. I don't know. It's not my business whether they still are in their church or not, but I definitely saw what happened to them as a crisis of faith. So they probably had it challenged. They probably had their faith challenged, right? Through that event. I mean, what happened was so harrowing that it got to the point that she saw evil in her youngest children. Right? She was looking for evil everywhere, that in the end, she saw it in her youngest children. And, I just hope that these young children have since gotten the support that they need to recover from the horrific trauma and abuse that they suffered at the hands of their own mother. This is a blood family betrayal. Et tu, mother? Right? Like, how do you recover from that deep a betrayal of one's own parent? Oh my goodness, just heartbreaking. And that led me again to that other question. What values are worth the cost of a friendship or of your children? Whose friendships or children are worth the cost of your values of this woman who was fixated on seeing evil everywhere so that she could starve evil to death, so that she could sweat evil to death, so that she could burn evil to death? Now, if you just substitute her children in the place of evil, she was starving her children to death. She was trying to sweat her children to death, leaving them out in the desert like for several hours, essentially burning her children to death. That's what this woman was trying to do to evil, and she was doing it to her children. So I look at those things. If you think starving evil to death is the way to go, then it's time to feed love. You don't starve evil to death, you feed love. If you're trying to sweat evil to death, just breathe love. Breathe it in and breathe it out. In every encounter with every other living being, breathe in love. Whatever they're throwing at you, put a filter on, mask it, breathe out their bullshit, and breathe in whatever love is through there. There's always something. Because when people are lashing out, it's usually because they're wounded inside. And so sometimes you need a pretty big shit filter. But just trust that they don't know what they're doing. Not that we need to all be Christ on the cross saying, forgive them, Father, they know not what they're doing. Sorry for that ultra-Christian influence. But if you're trying to sweat evil to death, just start breathing in love. And if you're trying to burn evil to death, find the comfort in love. Because I find for me that when I'm feeling most enraged, like fiery enraged, what's deeply underneath it is I just want to be comforted. I just want to know that this is not entirely 100% a shit show and that things will be okay, right? So feed love, breathe love, and find comfort in love. Because there's no evil except what we cultivate in our hearts, right? So, I feel like I had a couple of other things I was going to talk about, but I feel like that's probably enough for today on the Ides of March. Oh, the treat. Okay, let me see if I can do this. So like I said, I try to just test myself to see what are the things I can do live and what are my limitations and where might I need tools to do something better live, or other people, right? Like, it's always a collaborative effort, isn't it? Life is a collaborative effort. Life is a collaborative effort. Okay. So in order for me to do this, I'm going to go over here. And, okay, so going to just explain very briefly what this is. Not explain, I'm going to introduce what I'm doing. This is sort of my own weird, quirky, stripped-down version, adaptation of Drive by Incubus. So if you're an Incubus fan, I do not own the rights to this song. I am merely offering this as an engagement with the material, as an adaptation that I hope people enjoy. I am not making money off of this particular song. But I played it for the first time. Well, played. I was at a yoga retreat in Costa Rica. This was like the Thanksgiving after COVID, I think, where there were a few of us who were like, we need to escape and we need to get out of the craziness for a while. So there were all these COVID protocols, and we made it there. We had this, I think it was like a 7-day retreat in Costa Rica. And I was like the shaman in residence or something like that. I was there as like a facilitator at the end of the week, we were calling ourselves the Magic Makers. So shout out to all the Magic Makers out there. And I saw, the whole time I was there, I noticed that they had this little baby grand piano in kind of the lobby of this, colonial castle, Spanish-style castle in Costa Rica. So once again, if we don't acknowledge the history of the lands, then we are destined to simply repeat the same structures. So I do recognize that it's a bit weird for a decolonial shaman to be staying at a castle, but I was also just grateful that it was a beautiful location and I had an opportunity to be there with other fellow seekers of light in the world, to just share space together. And so I asked the people in charge, I was like, is the piano off limits? Like, do people play it ever? Is it out of tune? Like, are there rules about it? And she's like, no, go ahead. And so I said, okay, well, I won't do it late at night or early in the morning or when there's a yoga class going on. But I think it was after dinner one night, and I was kind of noodling around, I think, the afternoon that day to see if I even knew how to do this, because my partner and I play this with him on guitar and me singing. And that's the thing that has been, as a performer, I can sing, and there are some instruments that I can play. But when I try to sing and play an instrument at the same time, especially if, like, I can snap and sing, and I can maybe slap a rhythm maybe and sing. But if I have to play a rhythmic melody and sing a rhythmic song, it's like my brain can't do those things at the same time. And so that's why I have to do this in a very, very stripped down way. But then actually I kind of really dug it as this sort of very stripped down version of Drive. So I'll see if I can get through it. And I'll see if I get all the way through it. And if I have to, I'll stop playing and just sing, because I know how to do that. So let's see here. Oops. Sometimes I feel uncertainty stinging clear, and I can't help but fear take the wheel and steer. It's given me before, and it seems to have a vague, haunting mass appeal. Lately, I'm beginning to find that I should be the one behind the wheel. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes, yeah. Ever tomorrow brings, I'll be there, I'll be there. So if I decide to be one of the would I choose water over wine and drive? It's driven me before, and it seems to be the way that everyone else gets around. Lately, I'm beginning to find that when I drive myself, my life is found. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes, yeah. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there, I'll be there. Do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. No, 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 do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. No, 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 do-do-do-do-do. I'll leave it there before the last chorus. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, you can stream the Gaia Immersion Conference for free. If you sign up for free right now, watch it for free. A lot of these people are going to be giving us the tools to make it through the chaos that we're facing, right? So that we can be conscious with the presence of mind to face the transformations that are happening. We need to make sure that we are here, aware, and helping to guide them to a more compassionate, more loving, more holistic a place that is representative of a lot of different perspectives, with the earth at the center, loving us all, giving us her resources. So let's honor her. Let's get in right relationship. Peace out.